Poison Blade Vortex Assassin. Now this build has got some pretty significant changes this time around, and while there have been quite a few adjustments, the overall nerfs have not been too severe on this build. We have to adjust a little bit for some of the changes that happen, but all of that has been accounted for, and the build should be perfectly fine going into 3.15. Now this is a poison damage over time build. We're an assassin and we scale crit as well as poison duration. With the update, poison in general has gotten a 50% more damage multiplier, although the assassin has been nerfed a little bit to account for allowing other ascendancies to play as poison. Now all of this being said, I do still feel that for this build, assassin is the key because crit is still extremely important to scale Poison Blade Vortex. This is a build that can move extremely quickly through maps, does excellent boss damage as long as you're okay with staying in melee range, has extremely solid defensive layers, and is overall just a very, very solid character that can work at a budget level and also a Gigamax level. For 3.15, I have been massively overhauling all of my builds that I'm going to be posting here, and this is no different. Poison Blade Vortex has gotten a complete overhaul of the in-game gear. I've updated all of the different things within the path of building. It was getting a little bit old, so pretty much every single section has seen massive improvements. There are new multiple skill trees, including one that requires cluster jewels and one that does not, including new and improved intuitive leveling trees that should make a lot more sense for you leveling up. There are also crafting notes on any of the pieces of gear that you might be confused about crafting yourself, and how to obtain some of the other uniques as well in the notes. Speaking of notes, as with all of my builds that I'm putting out now, the notes have been modernized and massively updated. There is a ton of good information in these notes, and everything that you need should be within them. Now I know that some of you are not able to use Path of Building, so if that's the case, we have made complete dedicated channels within my Discord that's linked down in the description for anyone who isn't able to access Path of Building. Maybe you're a console player or you're on a computer that does not have access to it. If that's the case, make sure to join my Discord and there will be dedicated channels for all of my builds. Now patch 3.15 is a pretty big update to the game. This patch is going to have a giant shift in character power, and we really don't particularly know exactly how everything is going to go. So my goal is that as we get these updates and as we figure out what is best and what's going on, I will update the Path of Building for this to account for anything that we do learn. So make sure to check back on this video occasionally if you're wanting to see all of the latest updates or if anything new happens to pop up. Now I do want to give a bit of a disclaimer here. As I said previously, 3.15 is going to be a massive nerf to character power. Don't expect builds to play the same exact way that they did in previous leagues. Damage has been overall nerfed, Act 1 has been increased in difficulty, and the overall game will be slightly slower and slightly more difficult. So if you are having issues, it may not just be you, the game has just simply become more difficult. Now, for Poison Blade Vortex specifically, there are some things that you should expect. This build is relatively tanky, however, it is mainly focused around dodge. Dodge is a mechanic that is a straight RNG window. Sometimes you're going to dodge, and other times you simply will not. However, it does have extensive defensive layers, and if you are playing the game correctly, as well as have the correct gear and points on the skill tree, you really should not die very often at all. But the reason that I say this is that dodge builds typically can be pretty rough for hardcore, because you will just get into that one special circumstance where you just miss your dodge 4 or 5 times in a row, and unfortunately you'll die. All of that being said, we are easily able to get 5,000 to 6,000 life, a significant amount of damage, excellent clear, and pretty solid boss damage. Now when it comes to clear, this build does move quite quickly through maps. It doesn't require very much gear to get the map capabilities going, and something as simple as just a few chaos worth of unique can get you all the way up into yellow tier maps comfortably. When it comes to bossing, it will take a slight bit more investment, and depending on how expensive cold iron points are early on in this league, it could be extremely cheap to get into bossing or maybe a little bit more expensive. When you do obtain the cold iron points and start investing a little bit more into the build, the boss capabilities are excellent. You do need to stay in melee range for a short amount of time to be able to scale the damage, so if that's something that you're not comfortable with, this may not be the build for you if you're really looking for a bossing build. Now, as I said before, when it comes to gearing, getting the initial gear for this character is extremely easy. The mid-tier gear is also not too expensive. Now, depending on how common it is to farm Katarina this time around, Devouring Diadem may be cheaper or more expensive. I can't really determine that at this point, but beyond that, the mid-tier level of gear shouldn't be too bad. And if you want to get into the more expensive end, this build can actually be invested into quite heavily, and you can get quite a bit of damage out of some good gear. So now that you've got an idea of what you're getting into, let's jump into the game and take a little bit of a closer look. Hey guys, if you're enjoying the content, make sure that you like this video so that other people can enjoy it too. And if you're part of the huge percentage of people who are still not subscribed to this YouTube channel, make sure that you do that so that these videos will show right up in your feed. You can always change your mind later, and I greatly appreciate all of your guys' support. Now without further ado, let's get back into the video. This is the Poison Blade Vortex Assassin, a build that I'm quite fond of. It's been a staple on my channel for quite some time, and it's just overall been a very, very solid build. Now, in 3.15, we did get some pretty massive updates to how poison works. There were some nerfs to Assassin that were accounted for with some just generic bonuses to poison, and we did unfortunately lose a little bit of power on Uncle Carlito. This flask is not going to be like this at all anymore. However, the damage loss is not as severe as it might seem. It will still be good, we will just have to account for that with Chaos Resistance. On top of that, Adziri's did get nerfed a little bit, not too big of a deal, and then we did lose some power from Cinder Swallow Urn. We would just use this as life recovery, or we could simply just use a life flask. Both of those would work perfectly fine. Now beyond that, we did also sustain a nerf to Diamond Flasks. However, something very interesting was found, and that was that even though Diamond Flasks got nerfed, they're no longer going to have critical strike chances lucky, it's just going to be 100% increased crit. We stumbled upon this lad, Ungle's Harmony, and I'll show you more about this later in the Path of Building, but Ungle's Harmony is actually really, really strong for this build, especially when you put 20% crit quality on it. We'll talk about all of that later in the Path of Building. Now, speaking of the Path of Building, this video is going to be a little bit different than how I normally do these League Start videos. All of the information that we're going to talk about the build and all the specifics is going to be later on in the Path of Building. That is linked down in the description if you want to go grab it. I've done a lot of in-depth work on that Path of Building. Everything that you really need is in there, and remember as well, there are the Discord channels also linked down in the description if you're unable to get into Path of Building for some reason. Now, I did some recent testing on League starting this build over at twitch.tv/BigDucks, which you should go follow, by the way, and the vibe that I kind of got is that I don't think that it is worthwhile to level this build as Poison Blade Vortex anymore. I feel that with the change to the poison gem, it not giving chance to poison anymore, it really just isn't super worthwhile to go Poison Blade Vortex. With the AoE nerfs and everything else, it was kind of just barely holding on while leveling, and I think at this point it's probably best to just swap over to doing Toxic Rain, Caustic Arrow, and Toxic Rain Ballista. That way of leveling is extremely strong. All of that information is in the Path of Building, and I'll go over it there. Now, there are a couple different abilities that this build does use. The first one that we're going to talk about is going to be Withering Step. Now, one thing about Withering Step is that when you initially get into the budget version of this build, do not put Withering Step on your left click. It will eat up all of your charges of your Flame Dash very quickly. In the budget version, we are using wands, which means that we cannot use Whirling Blades. Because we can't use Whirling Blades, it really does eat up those Flame Dash charges real quick. On top of that, Second Wind is not really going to be that good anymore, so Second Wind's not really going to be worthwhile. Important that you don't put it on left click until you get the actual Cold Iron points. What this ability does is this gives us Elusive, which gives us movement speed, it gives us dodge, it gives us all kinds of good stuff. Because we are an assassin, we do actually have increased effective Elusive as well. This also is our source of Wither stacks. Now, if you really, really wanted to, you could get like Wither on a totem with increased duration and faster casting, but that takes up a whole slot that you would have to dedicate to it, so you'd have to lose something here. There's not really a lot of room to lose very many gems, and I think Withering Step is perfectly fine. You can very easily, with all of the increased duration and stuff that we have on this build, keep up those 6 stacks that it applies extremely easily, and if you really are super good at getting this on there, you can get even more than 6 stacks on there for a little bit. So Withering Step just makes us run really fast. It applies our Withering stacks as long as we are near an enemy when we use another ability, so keep in mind that you have to be on top of the enemy, and you see the circle that's around us, right? You stand on top of the enemy, you use any other ability, and it will apply those Withering stacks. The next ability that I want to talk about is another movement ability, which is Whirling Blades. We simply use this just as a movement skill, and it does apply Fortify. Now, Fortify is getting some nerfs, but it shouldn't affect this build too much at all. We didn't scale Fortify effect in any way. We just used it as something simple that we could put on this ability just to give us a little bit more of a defensive layer. The last movement ability that we are using is Flame Dash. We just use this to get out of boss's ways or move over gaps or things like that. One thing to note about Flame Dash is that if you do spam it, it does gain a cast time, so you don't want to spam Flame Dash. If you watch here, the first cast is instant, but then if you spam it, you notice how it adopts this little like cast time that you have to do. If you wait and only occasionally use it and don't spam it constantly, it will actually keep its instant cast. Now let's talk about our main abilities. The main ability of this build is Blade Vortex. Now we use Unleash on Blade Vortex, and you'll probably see this little 3 down here next to it. What that means is it casts multiple copies of the spell at once. You can see that we get 4 stacks per cast, and this allows us to easily keep up our Poison Blade Vortex stacks all the way up to 10 without very many issues whatsoever. It means that you don't have to spam cast it all of the time. You can only cast it occasionally and keep at maximum stacks. Poison Blade Vortex is an ability that hits pretty consistently, and the more stacks that you have, the more often it hits. You do want to keep this up at maximum stacks. This is the way that we're going to apply our poisons. Now, this is a poison damage over time build, so we do scale as much poison duration and as much poison damage as we can get. Poisons do stack infinitely, and having more duration on them and having more of them applied at one time does increase our damage significantly. We'll talk about that later on in the path of building. Now, why it's important to stack this poison and get all this poison damage going is because of this ability, Plague Bearer. And when you activate Plague Bearer, what it does is it takes some of the poison damage that you deal and stores it up as later use. Now, I'll show you this more when we actually do the map, but the idea is that you'll see this number up here in the top left. When this gets to maximum, you can activate Plague Bearer again, and it will start to dissipate some plague, and that is your main ability that you're going to use for clear. Beyond that, we do have a few additional abilities. We have Vol Blade Vortex, which is just a blade vortex that goes out and seeks enemies. I'll show you that in the map example. We do have a Enduring Cry. This is just something to get us some endurance charges, which is pretty nice. It'll give us some layer of defenses, and it also is just a quick heal that we can use while we're fighting bosses. Beyond that, we do have this Focus ability. This is granted to us by our Devouring Diadem. You see the increased duration of ailments you inflict while focused. This Focus ability is just given to you anytime you have something like this. I highly recommend it because, as I said previously, scaling the duration of our ailments, which is poison, causes us to do significantly more damage. So you just simply use this ability right before you're about to fight a boss, you pop all of your blade vortexes, you go up, you use Focus, and you blam them. Now, beyond that, we do have a few auras. We have Herald of Agony. This is just a buff for us. It gives us some more poison damage. We use Malevolence, more poison damage, and skill effect duration. I'm personally using Skitterbots. However, you will see that in the path of building, it is going to be Flesh and Stone. You can use either. Flesh and Stone in Sand Stance is going to be better for defensives, and Skitterbots is going to kind of be a hybrid of damage and defenses. Skitterbots is going to give you both a chilling aura and a shocking aura, meaning that it's going to make enemies take more damage and it's going to slow them a bit. So you could also fit in aspect of the spider here. However, I would be worried about trying to fit in more into the build as it is, because there has been a nerf to mana. Currently, my Blade Vortex costs about 45 mana. That is going to, I think, over double when the new patch comes through. Now, because we do use the Devouring Diadem, it gives us Eldritch Battery, so I'm not really too worried about Energy Shield on this build. At worst, we could get just another piece of gear that had Energy Shield on it. We could go for a budget chest piece that had some more Energy Shield on it if you wanted to do that. There's a lot of things that you could do to get a little bit more Energy Shield that would be nice, but just keep in mind, mana is getting heavily nerfed, so be careful with your auras. Early on, before you get Devouring Diadem, you may need to disable Herald of Agony, or maybe even disable Skitterbots, depending on how bad the mana really is. The other thing is that we do use a cast when damage taken, and this cast when damage taken is now going to require mana, so just keep in mind, there could be some issues with mana going forward. Now, talking about that cast when damage taken, there is one interesting thing that we do with this build that I don't really do on very many other builds. We do have an Immortal Call. That makes sense to most people. This procs whenever you take a bunch of physical damage from cast when damage taken. You should be good. However, we also do use Desecrates. Now, the reason that we use cast when damage taken Desecrate here is because this procs corpses on the ground, and that allows our Devouring Diadem to eat them with Feast of Flesh. Feast of Flesh eats a bunch of corpses off of the ground, and it gives you life, energy shield, and mana back. Happens every 5 seconds, and this is something that's actually super useful on bosses. So anytime that you take some damage from a boss, it'll proc your cast when damage taken, those corpses will spawn on the ground, Devouring Diadem will then eat them, and then you'll be able to, you know, just heal up every once in a while. It's actually pretty nice. Those all cost mana now on cast when damage taken, so it's going to be a little bit rough. So I do want to show you guys a map, and in this map we're going to be just running a random tier 16 that I rolled. This has got 2 additional projectiles, Endurance and Frenzy on hit, and LE Weakness. It's nothing special, just I hit it with an Alchemy Orb. Beyond that, we do have a bunch of very, very dangerous Sextant modifiers on here. This is quad take increased damage. This is chaos damage, physical damage, cold damage, fire damage. Very, very dangerous. We do also just have some scarabs that I grabbed on here, a Elder Scarab, Harbinger Scarab, Metamorph Scarab, Piranha Scarab. We're going to be running this normally, no master missions or anything. And let's get into it. Remember, this is on Awakener 8. This is going to be in Tyrann's Inn, which is this area. I don't think it's going to spawn Veritani or anything like that, but let's go ahead and get going. So if you pay attention up in the top left, you will see that Plague Bearer number start to go up here, and you will see this giant green aura that's coming out of our character. That is Plague Bearer. Plague Bearer is the main source of clear, and Jesus, we rolled some very, very terrible mobs on this map. What are they called? Whatever those things that throw the torches are, and additional projectiles. That's very, very dangerous. Cannibals or something like that, as I think is what they're called. You can kind of see that as we just move through the map, you put on Plague Bearer, you run around, it does quite a bit of damage, and we can move quite quickly. You keep up your Fortify stacks with your Whirling Blades, and yeah, the Cannibals are extremely dangerous. Because this is quad, take increased damage, if any of those Cannibals hit me, I will probably die. But you can see that the clear is quite good. Single target is fine as soon as you just stand on top of a mob. We'll sit here and probably die to all of this, because this is very spooky, but you can see like on the Elder Portal there, died relatively quickly. The defensive layers are quite good as long as you do keep Fortify up and you make sure to keep any flasks that you are using on. Now, I know that in the next patch we probably will be losing a lot of power from flasks. However, if you didn't want to use the Cinder Swallow Urn, you could just use a life version of it since they're kind of nerfing Cinder Swallow Urn a little bit, or you could just simply use an instant life flask, like a Panic Life Flask or something like that would be more than fine. You can also use Enduring Cry just to get yourself a couple endurance charges as you're running around. But as you can kind of see, even in a very, very large, dense map with all kinds of crazy mods and stuff on it, all of these different sextants that makes us take like a ton extra damage, we are for the most part fine. Now, the thing to remember that I said about this build earlier, you can see how I kind of take these big hits occasionally, right? Now, normally that's fine, and if I had Kintsugi, I would be taking even less damage than I am right now. Here's the boss. I'll pop cooldowns, and this build takes a couple moments to really scale up the damage, but you can see that once you do get those poisons stacking, they die relatively quickly. If you're just doing normal content, or you're in a league start doing like yellows and red maps, you shouldn't have that big of a deal, as long as you keep your health totals up and you make sure that your resistances are good. But that's going to be pretty much it for showing off the character and the map. The build is very, very fun to play. It zooms around quite quickly. Now from here, I want to jump into the path of building so I can show you all of the updates that we've done to the build. We can go over all the different skill trees and things like that, and we'll get all into the nitty gritty. So let's get over into path of building. Alright, so as I said previously, we have done extensive updates to this path of building. Very, very significant updates to pretty much every single thing. All of the trees have been modernized, we have done, all of the skills have been redone here, the item sets have been completely redone, configuration has been redone to make sure that everything in here should be correct and a likely circumstance. There's no like POB warrioring or anything going on in here. And of course the notes have been updated pretty substantially. Now, I learned about this cool new thing that you can do where you can actually put colors into the notes of Path of Building, so I'll probably be doing this going forward because it'll make it a little bit easier to see what is where and all kinds of stuff like that, so hopefully it looks good. The notes are rather extensive. There's a lot in here, so make sure that you check it out if you have any questions about the build. First, let's start with the skill trees. So I do like to go over this because some people do like to hear my thoughts about why I take these points and such. So when we're leveling up, remember that we're going to be Toxic Rain all the way up until map, so keep that in mind as we're going through these trees. So when we start out, we're going to be moving out through this physical and chaos damage. We're going to grab this life as well as this damage over time. You can get either of these first, that doesn't matter. The next level up that we're going to be doing is heading towards Method to the Madness. We do need chaos resist this time around. Uncle Carlito, that flask is going to hurt us quite a bit, so we really do want chaos resist. You could honestly take these nodes too if you really wanted some more chaos resist early on, but it's not completely necessary. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here, grab Revenge of the Hunted and this health, as well as head over towards Hunter's Gambit. This is only really useful to us while we're Toxic Rain, but they are very powerful nodes, so we're going to grab them now and respec them later. Moving after that, we're going to be moving up here and to the right, so we're going to move up through here, grab this life and this damage, life and damage, as well as these damage nodes here. This is also when we're going to get our first lab. Now, used to, for Poison Blade Vortex, I would suggest that you would go Noxious Strike first. However, this does basically nothing for Toxic Rain. This is mainly just going to be something that you use for Poison Blade Vortex leveling, and it was around the time that you swapped over. Nowadays, I'm going to be suggesting that you just go Mistwalker, because this is probably the best out of everything that you can get. The next section here is just going to come over and grab this dodge. Now, I know a lot of people, especially racers and things like that, don't get the full dodge nodes early on, all the way through phase acrobatics. I disagree with that because I'm not really much of a racer and I don't care about that. I can get through the axe in like 6 to 8 hours pretty comfortably most of the time. However, I like it to be a little bit safer so I can turn my brain off and not have to worry about stuff. Phase acrobatics and these extra dodge nodes help us do that. I like to be able to turn my brain off. Feels good, man. The next step that we're going to be taking here is moving down towards Wind Dancer. We're going to move through this life nodes. We're going to come down here. These chaos damage with attacks and poison damage multipliers work for both of these abilities. Toxic Rain and Caustic Arrow are both chaos damage attacks, so these nodes are actually quite solid early on, and then later this does give us damage over time multiplier with poison, some chance to poison, and some poison duration. These nodes are very good. Then we get Wind Dancer and these life nodes. The next step that we're going to be taking is we're going to be moving up here. We're going to be grabbing these life nodes as well as these chaos damage over time nodes, and we're going to be getting our second lab. Now, once again, we are not going Poison Blade Vortex early, and Toxic Rain does not scale very well with poison. So the next one that we're going to get is Opportunistic. Now, there is some argument that you could just simply go Noxious Strikes and Toxic Delivery because you're not going to be able to get to your Uber Lab early and you really want to have Toxic Delivery. If you're that worried about it, I would say that you can just spend the 10 Regret Orbs or 10 Respec points to respec these. However, I would personally go Opportunistic first and then move over into Toxic Delivery and such later. Opportunistic is going to make it so that much later on in the game when we are crit capped, which yes, we can still get crit capped with expensive gear, we're going to be immune to Reflect. This also does make us do a lot more damage when there is only one unique or rare enemy nearby, which is really solid for bossing, and then we take reduced damage when there are going to be a bunch of enemies around us. This is just a very, very solid node. The next step that we're going to be doing is moving over here towards the middle of the tree. We're going to come up from Wind Dancer here, move up, grab this life, grab this increased skill effect duration. This is really solid for both Toxic Rain and for Poison Blade Vortex. Having our Blade Vortexes last longer feels quite nice. Then we're going to be moving over to here, grabbing this Resist just because Resist is nice early in the game, and getting some life. This is also when we're going to be grabbing our third lab point. You will be going for Noxious Strike, obviously, because we are going to want to swap into Poison Blade Vortex around the time that you hit maps. And then the next set here is going to be a slight respec. Now, something that you can do in Path of Building now, if you weren't aware, is there's this little button down here that says Compare. If you hit this Compare button and you go to Lab 4, and then you go from here to Lab 3, you'll see that there is a slight bit of a respec here. This is because we don't really need these Hunter's Gambit nodes anymore, and we do want to move into some more crit instead of going through this section here. As you level up from 67 to 76, you're going to be putting these points in. You're going to be connecting this here. You'll respec these 3 points. You'll respec these 3 points. You'll grab these poison nodes, you'll grab Perfect Agony, and then you'll start putting points into Spell Crit Multi here. You'll also be able to start grabbing these jewel slots here. So this is just going to be a slight respec that you'll do around the time that you're hitting the end of the campaign, and this is when you're going to do your 4th lab. So the 4th lab, as I said previously, is going to be Toxic Delivery. This is what allows us to scale our actual damage. I waited to talk about specifically Noxious Strike because I want to talk about both of these together. Noxious Strike is going to give us our chance to poison and lets us scale the duration of our poison. This is also going to be our main way to recover life. What Toxic Delivery does is that now that we can scale the duration of our poison and the chance for us to poison, we can now scale that poison with crit also. So this just gives us generic 25% more damage when we crit, and it also gives us a base of +2 to chance to crit. This is a base crit chance that it gives us per poison affecting the enemy, maximizing at 2%. This allows us to have a ton more crit, and the reason why Assassin is so good for this build. Now, I already talked about the points and such that you put on the tree here, so we're going to start talking about how the trees split from this point. After you've gotten all of your labs and you've leveled up and everything's good, you will be able to choose between 2 different paths here. Very early on in the league, it's going to be hard to get a hold of Cluster Jewels, obviously, so you can simply start with the no cluster path. However, if you are a more top-end player or you're someone who knows how to craft Cluster Jewels earlier, knows how to make money early on in the league, I would highly suggest that you go with the Cluster Jewel path because it is significantly better. We're going to start with the no cluster path just so that I can show you exactly what's going to happen here. So we'll put on this no cluster path, and you'll notice that one of the first things that we do here is we grab this Will of Blades. These are just going to give us a little bit of physical and a little bit of crit chance, as well as grabbing some life here and some life here. Now, the next step that we're going to be making is we are going to be moving up towards the top of the tree. This Serpentine Spellslinger is a very powerful node. It is something that they added a couple patches ago that I never really messed around with. There is some hesitation in using it most of the time. Without Cluster Jewels, it's one of the better nodes that you have available to you. Now, the next step that we're going to be making is filling in this life over here on the left. After that, we are going to be filling in some of these jewel slots here. Jewel slots are very powerful for this build, and you can scale them quite well. You can get things like life, resistances, poison damage, generic damage, crit multi, all that kinds of good stuff. The next step that we're going to be taking is we're going to be moving into Dire Torment. Dire Torment is going to give us quite a bit of damage. This is one of the better damage nodes on the tree when it comes to actually doing poison ailment damage. Also note that we are going to respec these points right here, and then we are going to put in these 3 nodes to Heartseeker here, and that is the end of the no clusters tree. Now moving back a step, this is where we were at the very end of the leveling section. We're going to be moving into the cluster path now. So when you begin doing the cluster path, one of the first things that I suggest that you do as soon as you are able to get it is get a very large thread of hope. This is an item that drops off of Cirrus. It's going to be relatively rare early on in the league, so you can simply skip these points very early on. There's information in the notes about how to skip these points. The TLDR is you just put these 2 points in instead of like allocating the other ones that it allows you to do. But this Thread of Hope is very powerful because it allows us to get Swift Venoms, which is a huge damage increase for this build. And then we also do just grab Heart of Oak here. It's some extra life and some regeneration. And then we do grab Revenge of the Hunted. Beyond that, we will begin putting in our points into clusters. We'll move into the large cluster. And when you're making these large clusters, Grim Oath is the one that you're really going to want to go for. This is going to be the majority of the damage when it comes to all of these different clusters that we can get, a significant amount more than the rest. There's information on how to craft these clusters in the notes. I do suggest that you just buy them because they're going to tend to be cheaper on average if you do buy them. Now, the next step that you're going to be doing after you get those clusters is you are going to be moving towards your first medium. This node right here, Overwhelming Malice, is one of the most important nodes on the entirety of the tree. I suggest that if you don't get any other cluster jewels, you just get Overwhelming Malice. I want to show you why. So if we go over into our configuration here, you'll notice that I have Unholy Might ticked. Now, if you are going to refuse to use this node on cluster jewels, you can always get a Sin's Rebirth if you really want to. However, watch what happens to the damage here when I untick Holy Might. We lose 540,000 DPS out of 3 million. Unholy Might is very, very powerful. Do not skimp on this node. If you can only get a single cluster jewel, a single crit medium with just Overwhelming Malice on it, get Overwhelming Malice. It's very good. Basics of Pain is a good choice because it is so easy to roll. Overwhelming Malice is a little bit rough to roll because it has no modifier, like no modifier tags on it. It's got nothing. It doesn't even have crit, doesn't have chaos, doesn't have physical, doesn't have anything. Then we are just going to put in a simple Crimson Jewel here, just one of a whatever you can get, life, damage, that kind of stuff. On the next set that we're going to do here, we're going to move into our other medium. Now this is a chaos damage over time medium, and we do use Circling Oblivion as well as Hemorrhage. These are both very, very powerful. Crit, damage over time from ailments, as well as increased duration of ailments and damage over time. Very strong, and then also another jewel. The next step that we're going to be doing is we're going to be filling in some life. If you see here, the only thing that we really do is we are going to be swapping out these points again, because early on these damage nodes are nice and it's not really required that you change them. However, getting a little bit more regen and swapping out of the damage over time is quite good, as well as filling in these last little points right here: Heartseeker, Unwaveringly Evil. That is going to be the last jump that you make, and that is going to be it for the cluster path. Hopefully these trees should make a little bit more sense going forward. I know that my trees previously were based off of ascendancies. Hopefully this gives you a little bit better information. Now let's move on into the skills. So as I said previously, we have moved to specifically Caustic Arrow and Toxic Rain as the leveling abilities. We are no longer going to be leveling as Poison Blade Vortex when we get Unleash. I just don't feel that it's worth it. If you take a look here, these are all of the links that you should use. They are in order of importance. So that means that if you have a 4 link, you would try to use all 4 of these, but then you'd probably be like, but Big Ducks, what about at level 12 where I can't have Vicious Projectiles because you can only get it from the library? Well, you would move one down. So if you can't get Vicious Projectiles, you would use Caustic Arrow, Pierce, Void Manipulation, and Efficacy. That goes the same with everything else. We have a Toxic Rain self-cast as well as a Toxic Rain Ballista. Now, this is going to be very, very powerful early on. For the Ballista, you probably can swap in the new Focus Ballista support. I am not able to check it in here and I'm not able to test it, but it should be pretty interesting. This is only really used while leveling, but having both the self-cast and the Ballista is really, really good for a single target. I tested that out when we were leveling up our Toxic Rain Raider, and it worked very, very well. As for auras, you can use any of these that you like. Your mana might be tough early on simply because of the new mana changes that we're getting. If you have issues with your mana, just remove some of your auras. I would say Skitterbots is the best aura out of all of them just to run. It has some damage and some defensives. For movement, we still use Flame Dash and Smoke Mine, and then we do have a cast when damage taken. Keep these at very, very low levels permanently. They cost mana now when they proc. It's ridiculous. And then we do have all of our skills. Keep in mind that the alt qualities are not needed unless I specifically say somewhere in the guide that you need that alt quality. None of them are needed. I just put in the ones, if they are going to be good to have alt quality, like alt quality Deadly Ailments is actually insanely good. It's equivalent to a level 5 Awakened Deadly Ailment, so keep that in mind. And then all of the links are in order once again. This is Blade Vortex with the Awakened gems. Deadly Ailments and normal Deadly Ailments with Anomalous are very, very close, within 1%, I'm pretty sure. We do have our Plague Bearer. Plague Bearer now does have Enhanced link to it. The interesting thing here is if you're using Divergent Plague Bearer, which I don't know how expensive of this is going to be. You can get some additional damage over time multiplier while you're poisoning. You could also go anomalous for more movement speed, or you can click default for increased area. With the enhance in here on top of everything, that'll give us an extra 24% quality, which will boost up that alt quality Plague Bearer pretty high, should be pretty good. From our auras, we're going to be using Malevolence, Herald of Agony, and then either Flesh and Stone or Skitterbots. Keep in mind that between Flesh and Stone and Skitterbots, you can choose whichever one you like. I talked about it earlier in the video. I personally go with Skitterbots, but if you want a little bit more defensive, Flesh and Stone in Sand Stance is going to be the one that you want to do. We have Whirling Blades Fortify and faster attacks, and then Flame Dash, Enduring Cry, Withering Step, as I said previously. Be careful about the cast when damage taken. We also do self-cast the Despair until you're able to get a curse on hit ring. Now, as for the items itself, there are 3 sets of items here. In the budget items, you are going to have Obliteration Wands, and these are just going to be very cheap early on. They're going to give you excellent clear. They're not going to be good for bossing. Keep that in mind. These are not good weapons for bossing. You really, really do want the Cold Iron points for bossing. They'll be significantly better. And then we land on the star item of this build. Now, something that I want to show you real quick is I want to move over to the expensive items. These are a bunch of crazy items. They got like 8 million DPS or something like that. We're on the Cluster Jewel tree. I want you to look at Ungles, and I want you to look at the amount of damage that we lose when we take Ungles off. I don't know if you can see that, but it's 2.38 million DPS that we lose by taking off Ungle's Harmony, a 1C amulet. This gives us 420, nice global critical strike chance, and then it allows us to also corrupt this pretty easily. Now, the reason why we get 420 is because we have this augmented with 20% crit modifier quality. This amulet's pretty nuts. Since we did lose the lucky crit strike chance from Corralitos now, with the Ungle's Harmony on, this is currently more damage for this build than a +1/+1 amulet. I know that seems insane, but a Ungle's Harmony with 20% crit quality and a decent quality version of it with it doesn't even have to be corrupted like this with Malevolence effect, is better than a +1/+1 amulet. Going back to what I said before, you can just use a standard one early on. You allocate whatever modifier that you want. Early on, Poisonous Fangs is very cheap. It's right here. This is what it is right here. Later on, you can do Dirty Techniques. Dirty Techniques is significantly better, but it has a silver oil in it. There is also the option of going this one up here, which is Dire Torment. You can go any of these. If you're doing the non-Cluster Jewel tree, Dire Torment is part of it. Just keep that in mind. Beyond that, I've updated pretty much everything in here. The flash should be correct, but I'm not 100% certain. We're going to have to see what happens with flasks. When we jump into the mid-tier items, you're going to see Kintsugi is in here. We've got the Devouring Diadem. We swapped over into Corralitos and Atziris. We've got the Cold Iron points. This is what's going to allow us to do the big single target damage. And then the expensive items, we have some pretty interesting stuff here. So the main thing that has been updated here is the fact that, one, we're using the Ungle's Harmony. I have finally relented and just decided that Ace Gentle Touch is the way to go. Because we do need a little bit more clear going on nowadays, these are going to be really solid. They're super expensive, I understand that, but they're just good. On top of that, we have this very interesting chess piece here. Now, this is an idea that we had on stream. We were looking for like how to craft like a really good chess piece here, and there's actually notes on how to craft this specific chess piece. It's not as hard as it might seem. But this is a +1 of all skills, which we use Volblade Vortex, +1 active skills, a curse, and a spell crit chess piece, and it's actually relatively straightforward to make. Pretty easy. Beyond that, we have some corrupted Cold Iron points. Nothing too special in here. We do have the Despair on hit ring, so we have Despair as well as Acinus, plus the +1 curse here from the Sacrificial Garb. Everything should be pretty solid. Going into the configuration, this is pretty fair, and in my defense here, this is pretty fair. I feel like I could have like tweaked this a little bit more in my favor damage-wise, but we're not using any charges because we can't really generate them too easily. There are ways that you could do this with like Blood Rage and such, but it's not really super worthwhile to do, especially with the mana changes that are going to be happening and such. You can tick Focused here. We do have Focused because of our Devouring Diadem, so do keep that in mind. Focused makes you do a lot more damage. We do have Unholy Might on because it will be on. We have 1 unique or rare enemy nearby, 20 poisons applied recently. We can easily apply more than 20 recently. We have 6 Withered stacks. This is the minimum amount that you can get from the actual Withering Step. Realistically, this is probably going to be more like 10 average because it's not going to be 12 uptime constantly. Gonna probably be around like 9 or 10 just because we can keep a lot of stacks up, but we've kept it at 6 just to keep things realistic. 5 poisons on the enemy. Realistically, we could have like a bajillion poisons on the enemy at any given time. Cirrus, Awakener 8, Sand Stance, nothing else crazy. Last thing to remember, notes, 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 notes. Read the notes. There's lots of stuff in the notes. There's lots of cool stuff in here, like the crafting notes and stuff like that. Remember that chess piece I was telling you about? This is how you craft it. It's pretty straightforward. make sure that you go read those notes. And that is pretty much everything that you're going to need to know. So now remember, if you do have any further questions, anything that I haven't answered in this video, or you're just wondering what's up, you want to talk about all the different builds and all the kinds of stuff like that, make sure that you join my Discord channel. It is linked down in the description. There is a specific channel made for this build in the Discord. It will be updated over time as we do get time. You know, some of us are going to want to actually play the League Start as well, so keep that in mind. There's a bunch of helpful people over there. I'd love for you to become a part of the community. Also, don't forget that I stream Monday through Friday, 11 to 4 at twitch.tv/BigDucks. We'll probably be streaming a lot for the League Start. I haven't been able to stream as much because I've been making all these videos recently, but we're going to get back into streaming here in the next couple of days. So if you want to ask particularly me a question or something like that, make sure to come hang out with your boy. So thank you for all your support. I do appreciate each and every one of you. Remember to like the video if you enjoyed it so that other people can enjoy it as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel for more content similar to this, and stay safe out there in raid class. And I will see you all in 3.15 Expedition League.